think that will be, we can get started. Thank you everybody for joining us. This is the October Denver Short-Term Rental Advisory Committee meeting. We are meeting via Zoom, so let me see if I can get my technology to share my screen. Can you all see the slideshow that says public comment right now?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, great. Let's see. So when I sent out the slides, I realized, thanks to Alex, who is our amazing tech, licensing tech, that I included the licenses at denvergov.org email address. That is part of our new 311 tracking system. So we realized that there may be a lag if you wanted to sign up for public comment using that email. The way it's going to work is that we are going to allot some time at the end for public comment. If you are on the Zoom app on your computer or your phone, you can use the raise hand feature at any time during the meeting and leave it up, and we will call you in order that you've raised your hand. However, we know that some people might be calling in using their telephone, so they wouldn't have that raise hand feature. If you are somebody who's calling in from the public and you want to sign up for public comment, just email me directly. My email is there on the screen, erica.rogers@denvergov.org, and I will check that just before we go into public comment. So sorry in advance, or sorry for that confusion, but thanks to Alex for pointing that out.
Erica, where is the raise hand feature?
It should be somewhere in your app. There is a little command center where you can mute yourself and unmute yourself or turn your camera on and off, and it should be somewhere around there.
Hey, Erica, if you click on the participants link at the bottom of the screen, so there's mute and then stop video and then participants, share screen and record at the bottom of everyone's screen. If you click on participants, on the right-hand side, all of the participants and panelists and attendees will show up, and then raise hand will be on the bottom right-hand side. So for anyone who's a panelist, that's where the raise hand button will be. For anyone who is who's viewing the webinar online, if we're doing webinar, yes?
Yes.
I think we're doing webinar, yeah. So anyone who's viewing the webinar will have the raise hand button just directly on the bottom bar of their screen. That's where it's located.
Awesome, thank you. And if you are a STRAT committee member and you want to speak, you don't have to raise your hand. You can just speak as we would in a normal meeting, as much as we can make it normal. So thank you for Councilwoman Sawyer for that. So with that, I think we'll dive right into the licensing and enforcement updates for October. We will start with what we typically start with, which is the compliance trends. And this is our ongoing look, historical look and current look of a snapshot of our number of unique properties being advertised in Denver, the number of active short-term rental licenses, and then looking at the comparison between those to get a licensing rate. So we are hovering pretty consistently in the low 80s throughout this year. We're at 83%. One thing to mention is that we recently ended our contract with Host Compliance at the end of the month in September. The city is going through the RFP process to sign the new contract with the new vendor. So we may see a gap at our next meeting or two in this specific data. However, what we can see is that all through 2019, we were in the high 70s percentage-wise for licensing, and this year we've seen 70s to 80% of our unique properties that we're seeing online being licensed. So that is good.
Erica, is that something that city employees could do instead of a contract with an outside agency?
So we have, we are at the end of the RFP process for a new vendor. I don't know that we can announce who the vendor is yet, but that is something that we have budgeted for, is a new compliance vendor.
Does the new vendor have things that that host compliance didn't have? Is there a reason for the switch, or is it any background you can give us?
Sure. I don't know, Brian or Molly, do you want to speak to that?
This is Brian. It obviously COVID affected some budget things, and it was a good opportunity to reevaluate some other companies out there. Obviously, you know, as with short-term rentals on the platform side, things have evolved. On the compliance side, some things have evolved. I would say 3 years ago when we went with host compliance, they were probably or close to the only game in town. So with the budget crisis of COVID, it was a good opportunity to reevaluate where we were spending our money and what kind of options some other places have. And I wouldn't say that another company is offering anything different or more special than anything else. They all kind of have similar product lines.
Just the question that I'm asking then is, was this worth it? Did we gain from this? And going forward, is it something that the city could do in lieu of entering into a contract with an outside agent?
Are you
Erica,
asking the city could handle the things that a compliance software company was handling for us?
Yes.
Not a chance.
Okay. That's why I needed Brian.
Okay. So we will try to provide as much info as we can, but like I said, just wanted to give you all a heads up that there will be a gap for the next meeting, maybe two, till we get up and running. But based on our historical data, as you can see here, we do enjoy a pretty high compliance rate, and we expect to continue that. So on the next slide, you can kind of see again, this is similar data just shown differently. The high rate of licensure, especially most recently, is due to just a slight decrease and a much larger decrease in the number of unique properties that we're seeing being advertised. So that gap between those two lines, the red and the yellow there, is becoming smaller. Our speculation is that that's due just to decreased demand during the pandemic. I think that's everyone's kind of general understanding until and unless we, see any other data or evidence that shows otherwise. Moving into our 311 data and trends, this is kind of the year-over-year overview, where the green bar there is the number of calls that we're getting in each category year-to-date 2020, and the blue bar is the number of calls we got in all of 2019. So you can kind of see the difference in the types of calls that we're getting. Obviously, we're seeing fewer calls overall, but the biggest drops being in the categories about administrative citations and notices of violation, followed by applications and renewals. We're seeing only a slight decrease compared to the timing of last year about property complaints, but we're pretty on par for general inquiry. This is that same data, just shown a little more broken down. So this is by month, the number of calls we got in each category. And we did switch over, I believe, February-ish, March, to our updated 311 classification system. So Now all of our calls are being tracked through Salesforce in our 311 call center, which has helped us streamline a lot of things, and it's been really great for response time. But as you can see, the numbers by category, the blue bar is administrative citations and notices of violations month by month. The red is applications and renewals. Green is general inquiries and questions, and that yellow is property complaints. We don't get many other category anymore, as those are generally in our inquiries and questions. And just a third way to view it, even though our raw numbers are down, we're seeing a pretty similar breakdown of the percentage of total calls in each of these categories. Obviously, the biggest growth has been in that general inquiries and questions, with everything else shifting respectively. Moving on from 311 data, this is our some application statistics that Alex has been so wonderful about keeping and getting for us. So big thanks to Alex for this. As of October 12th, we currently have 192 total pending applications. And we get a lot of questions about what the status of those pending applications are. 57 of them are awaiting action from the applicant. 99 are under review by our department, and then 36 are under review by another city agency, whether it's zoning, building, city attorney, but someone other than excise. I kind of put benchmarkers in here from this data was up in the slides 2 months ago in August. So we had numbers of new applications and renewal applications in April. We saw a little bit of an increase in June in the total applications, but we're seeing a little bit of an increase as well from August and September. So we kind of hit a slump around March, April, May, and what we've seen through the summer is that we are slowly but surely seeing an increase again for new and renewal applications. I'll let Brian jump in if he has anything to add on this slide, but this is just an update on the disciplinary action as well. One thing that we realized is that we've been tracking since the beginning of when we started doing this. And so the numbers this month just reflect the numbers in the last 12 months, so in the past year. So in the past year, we've had 106 application withdrawals. We have closed 144 administratively, and we have had 27 denials in the past year, with a total of 60 since we've started tracking this, almost a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that. Of those 60, 2 are pending hearing, 9 had a hearing with the denial upheld, and 45 were not appealed. As far as affidavits go, and we have sent 386, those are the primary residence affidavits. We've sent 386 in the past year, with 195 of those returned. The number of licenses show cause has not changed, 18 since April 2018, with 15 resulting in revocation or surrender. So I don't know, Brian, if you have any other tidbits to add, but those are the numbers about disciplinary actions.
I have a question. This is David Pardo. Under denials, it says that there are 60 total, but 2 + 9 + 45 equals 56. So that doesn't account for 4 of the denials.
And Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, they might be under a review by a different agency. Is that?
They're probably upstairs, when I say upstairs, with the city attorney's office, and they haven't written the denial. So in our records, we've sent them up for a recommended denial. I know I sent a couple up 2 weeks ago, so that's probably it. And the city attorney is swamped with COVID stuff. So taking an extra minute or two to get those out.
And then a second, thank you for that answer. That makes a lot of sense. And then the second question is closed administratively. Is that just you guys, let's say, asked for something and extra information and they never returned it and you waited a certain length of time and then it was just closed. Is that what that's referring to?
Yes.
Cool.
And I believe that
That's
time
exactly what it
period,
is, whether it's part of the application, like they didn't turn in a driver's license, or it could be the affidavit, because once we ask for the affidavit, it becomes part of the application. If they don't send it back, we just close it after a couple of months.
Cool. And then the last thing I think related to applications that I've got is one of my clients had submitted a renewal, I want to say back in like May, and they weren't really asked for much of anything, but 90 days after their prior year's license had expired and they were, on their, waiting for their application, they received a message that their prior years was no longer valid, but they didn't get a denial or an approval or any request for additional information. So I was, and then I had another new client get their application approved in something like 14 minutes. So I was wondering if there was anything you could speak to on that topic.
Yeah, I would have to look at it individually. So if you could send me that address, I'll see what's going on and see kind of where the system faltered there.
Cool.
I need to know that information. And so if we got too long into the process and the computers did something, then I need to know that.
Cool.
great. Thanks, David. If Sophia, I think I saw Sophia here, and if so, I will let her talk a little bit about the lodger's tax update because she is better at this than I am. So Sophia, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. So this last couple of months has been a really nice increase back into lodger's tax revenue generated just in general in the city, including all hotels, but also with the short-term rental community. We're averaging about 11.1% of the total lodger's tax collected is collected through the STR licenses, which is really encouraging that has kind of been able to be restructured and maintained. The collections, so I'll talk a little bit about the numbers. The year-to-date 2020 that's on this slide of 4.1 million is the deposits made through 10/1. And our lodger's tax is due the 20th of the month following the preceding month. So this doesn't necessarily reflect through September. It's more likely through August and anyone who paid September early, because lodger's tax due for September isn't due until 10/20, which is next week. So the collections and deposits from, let's see, what did I say? It was April, May, and June for periods of recognized of March through May, compared to June, July, August, September, and actually, June, July, August periods deposited in all the way through September 30th have increased about 420% this year. So we're kind of back on the uptick, and that's really nice to see that economy is growing. The number of lodger's accounts we have to business licenses has been a discussion in the past, but I'd be happy to answer any questions if people have questions about that detail or anything else on this slide.
Sophia, can you just restate the 420% increase? I didn't quite understand that. Thank you.
Yeah, so from the periods of, let's see, bear with me. April through June deposits was about 264,000 for STR revenue. And then July through September deposits was 1.1 million. So that's where I'm getting the 420% increase in the amount of taxes that have been collected and paid and reported so far.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions?
Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, thanks so much, Sophia. That's great news. It sounds like, you know, positive news for our short-term rental industry and for our tourism, recovering from some of those early decreases from the pandemic. Okay, next we will talk about some current events, and then we'll get to the ordinance language. So some of the hot topics in the world of short-term rentals. Thank you so much to everybody who sent in articles. We got a lot this month. There's a lot going on, a lot of different perspectives and takes on things. So I tried to include some extra links if I got multiple articles about the same thing. First and foremost, I think one thing that we're seeing a lot of press and media on right now is just how short-term rentals are faring with the pandemic and how the industry's doing. There's been a few articles that indicate that short-term rentals are outperforming hotels. Not to say that either of them are thriving, but of the tourism that we're seeing, short-term rentals seem to be faring a little bit better due to the ability to be a little bit adaptive, to be able to implement things that guests are looking for right now, and to align with the trends. So I included 3 articles that people sent me from the committee that you can read more about that. Another big development that we're seeing is from one of our committee member partners. Airbnb has decided to combat the negative effects of some of the house parties that we've been seeing, as well as the negative effects from people renting short-term rentals to have large gatherings during the pandemic. So there will be a limit on Halloween stays. I don't know if Aisha, if you want to talk about that a little bit since you're on the call.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Glad to be joining. I think we just want to continue to be partners, especially during this pandemic. We want to prevent parties and nuisances. We want to make sure the STRAC and the Office of Excise and Licensing can continue to focus on the hardcore trust and safety issues. And so there are certain points in the year, including Halloween, among others, where we see a huge uptick in police calls. And so we just want to make sure we're doing our part as a platform. And so we will be banning and limiting one-night stays on Halloween for guests that we determine are within the same geography where they reside, to help cut down on that.
Thanks. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay. Another announcement from Airbnb this month of note is that the company announced a new pilot program that grants a handful of US cities and I believe 1 Canadian city access to certain local listing information. So I included a couple articles about the city portal. Aisha sent me a list of the cities that they're rolling this out in, including Buffalo, Calgary, Miami-Dade, New Orleans, Palm Springs, Raleigh, Sacramento, Seattle, San Francisco, and Vancouver. We also met recently with Airbnb. They gave us a preview for what it could look like in Denver in the next phase of city rollout. So that was really interesting to see. And we thank them for showing that to us, that new tool. Finally, another article that was sent involves international short-term rental news. So that's kind of fun and interesting. In Ireland, the country has a one host, one home rule, which is similar to our primary residence rule. And there are members of parliament there talking about regulation of platforms as opposed to enforcement efforts that are only focused on hosts. And I thought that was a really timely article, considering that that's something that's happening across the US and cities as well, and ties into the spirit of partnership that we are hearing. So that's a cool article. Go check it out if you haven't heard already. Next, we are going to talk about some policy updates, the main one being the draft language that was sent around and posted on our website. We are discussing, of course, platform accountability. And so just for a reminder or for an intro for anyone who is new, maybe in the attendee list, the STRAC has been talking about this for a little over a year now. It was one of the committee's goals in 2019 and 2020 to look into some regulation of not just the hosts who participate in the short-term rental industry, but other entities that earn profit as well, including the platforms that book the transactions from the host, and facilitate the transactions between the hosts and the guests. So about a year ago, last summer, we looked at platform accountability in other cities. I just added this slide so that if anyone wanted to refresh their memory on some of the other cities we looked at, I tried to link to some of the relevant ordinances or websites for those cities. But you can see that many cities are starting to look at some kind of platform accountability in their ordinances, and that varies city by city. Some have licensing requirements, some have reporting requirements, some simply have, unlawful acts. So different cities do it differently. And there has been some legal action. I know we talked about that last summer, resulting in some settlements or agreements between those cities and the platforms that operate there. Finally, as you can see, most of the cities list explicit penalties for noncompliance. So similar to how, many cities started regulating hosts and requiring licenses, this is a trend that we're seeing across the country and globally as well. So those of you who got a chance to read through the draft language, looking forward to your feedback. The overall changes, it's a very short ordinance, but the overall things that are covered are these 4 things here. We would first define and regulate the platforms, calling them booking service providers for short-term rentals. There would be penalties for booking service providers who process illegal transactions, and that's simply a transaction that is facilitated between a guest and an unlicensed host. And then there are provisions in there to help assist the enforcement of the regulation, which include record keeping. And finally, there's some language that we're adding to our licensing chapter 32, just to clarify some existing practices that we undertake for all of our licenses. We can talk a little bit about those at the end as well. So first here would be the definition for booking service providers. It would be any person or entity who facilitates a transaction between a prospective guest. So in order to regulate, we have to define. So that's the first thing that the ordinance would cover. Any questions about that definition?
Yeah, I guess from the perspective of, let's say, a property manager, it says any person or entity that facilitates a transaction between a prospective guest and a person or entity operating a short-term rental. Would that effectively make a property manager a booking service provider as well?
I am going to kick that to our city attorney. Reggie, are you here?
Yeah, I'm on here. So Reggie Newbon with the City Attorney's Office. I mean, yeah, if the property manager is the person that's facilitating the transaction between the prospective guest and the short-term rental, yeah, they could fall within that definition. In the simplest answer, yeah.
I guess then the follow-up question would be, just sort of for clarification, is that true only if, let's say, I as a property manager have a listing that's off of, like, let's say Airbnb that's on my own private website, or would that also apply if I am utilizing a platform like Airbnb or VRBO or something else like that? So it's a sort of a yes or no. I totally understand if I'm running my own website that I'd count as a booking service provider, but if I'm not, can I still be counted as a booking service provider?
So we don't go as deep in requiring that you provide a website for people or some sort of platform to do it. If you are a person that is facilitating the transaction between the guest and the person that's offering the short-term rental, and the way that normally we would think about that is that's a person, that's a platform, right? That's Airbnb, that's Craigslist, that's the third party that's providing the contact between those two individuals. But I think that there is a realm of possibility where a property management company could fall within that. I think it's going to depend on the facts and the circumstances and the situation. But yeah, a property management company could be a booking service provider.
Okay, I guess, yeah, it's something where maybe it makes sense for us to, because I think that's a pretty big deal. There are, at least a dozen or a few dozen of us property managers here in town. And if we have our own website where people are booking directly, doing direct booking in industry parlance, then being called a booking service provider, it makes sense. The worry is that if my next door neighbor wants me to run their Airbnb while they go on vacation for a month, because instead of renting their bedroom, they're going to rent out their whole house while they're out of town. And suddenly, halfway through the month, somehow their license disappears or they forgot to send in a renewal, whatever the case is. And suddenly I am being held accountable at $1,000 a day for their listing not being valid on Airbnb instead of it being, if that's on Airbnb, they're a multi-billion-dollar company. If that's on me, that could bankrupt me.
I'm sorry, 1 second, David, sorry. You would also have to be the person that's facilitating the transaction, right? So there's that piece of it too. So if you, the exchange of money isn't going through you. I'm thinking about this in the sense of the property management company has a whole bunch of Airbnbs or something like that on their website. And they're the ones that are connecting the guests and the Airbnb owner to each other. So they're essentially acting like Airbnb would, and you're paying some sort of money to the property management company. Then there's that facilitating a transaction piece. In that case, the management company would definitely be a booking service provider. But if you are just connecting a person to, if you're just operating for the Airbnb, some person's Airbnb, then there's no transaction going on right there between the host and the person that's staying at the Airbnb. So you're not going to be a booking service provider in that case.
Got it. So effectively a booking service provider is the one processing the credit card, to put it very plainly.
Yes.
Cool.
But if I can jump in and just ask a further clarifying question, some people do direct bookings direct through off platform, not necessarily doing that just because they maybe have their own brand. There's destinations where people book direct with a property manager or direct with the host, and they take that transaction to PayPal, Squarespace, or whatever. So it kind of does put them back into this category as the booking service provider, if I'm following correctly.
Yes, you're following that correctly. So if I'm operating off platform, word of mouth, hey, come and stay at my Airbnb, then yeah, I would be my own booking service provider. I'm a person that's facilitating a transaction between a prospective guest and my Airbnb, my short-term rental. So yeah, at that point in time, then I would fall within the provision of a booking service provider, and therefore would need to follow all of the rules and regulations that are in these amended provisions.
So in that scenario, though, Dana, it sounds like you're talking about an individual who's hosting. And so, I mean, they're already responsible for making sure that they have a license, right? And so this is just, again, reinforcing that if they're going to be processing that transaction, again, they're responsible for making sure that they have a license. If they're processing the transaction on behalf of another host, again, they're still responsible for making sure that host, per this new ordinance language, they will be responsible for making sure that that host is licensed.
Great. Thank you.
I have a question. Is this just for them being licensed, or are they also responsible for making sure that it's a primary residence situation, if that is the rule of the city and county?
So I think, is your question what, once you qualify as a booking service provider, what are you responsible for doing or not doing?
Right. So you're saying that they are definitely responsible for making sure that they have a license. But if you are a booking facility, are you also responsible for the knowledge of the primary residence rule, if that is, you know, within that city and county?
So I can answer that question just a different type of way. Is the only thing that the ordinance is putting on the booking service providers is this unlawful act, and it says that it's unlawful for a booking service provider to receive payment directly or indirectly for an unlicensed short-term rental located within the city and county of Denver. So it's the unlicensed piece. So I guess there is I mean, you could think of the hypothetical of a person is on a booking service provider, and then later the city finds out that this location isn't their primary residence. We would take action against that license. I think further discussion would need to occur on what to do about the booking service provider. I think at that you know, the booking service provider was in compliance, and so Eric, I know you guys are probably going to talk about what you're thinking about how we're going to enforce these provisions, so that might answer a few other questions about those types of scenarios.
Okay, thank you.
Did anyone else have any questions about the definition? If not, we'll move on, like Reggie said, to the one unlawful act, which is making it unlawful for anyone who falls in the category of a booking service provider to receive that payment either directly or indirectly for an unlicensed short-term rental. So if thinking back to a couple of years ago when we were seeing a lot of transactions for unlicensed short-term rentals, we tried to, you know, solve that problem in a lot of different ways. The first way was adding some clarity around what the primary residence requirement was for hosts. This is another way. Even though we have a very high rate of licensure in the city, we still do have that persistent gap. And we think that, you know, by having this in place, this is something that the committee has said, you know, that will help close that gap and continue to make Denver a leader in this industry and in what a good and compliant market really does look like. So by making that an unlawful act, there's also an associated penalty, which would be $1,000 per violation per day. And, you know, we've gotten a couple questions about this, just internally, how this might work. So a good comparison, I know we're all kind of adapting to the digital world and the gig economy, even though we're all very interested in short-term rentals. So it seems new and it seems different, but it's actually, think about it in comparison to what we ask our local bars and restaurants to do, right? There's a requirement that you are not to serve somebody who is under 21 years of age with an alcoholic beverage. That is the law. And just like that law, we don't tell people how to do it. We get, you know, there's, for example, some use a card reader, some use a book of state licenses so that they can compare them. Some require training for employees above and beyond what the state requires. We don't dictate any of that. we just say, hey, don't serve alcohol to underage kids. And if you do and you get caught, you're going to get fined. So it's a similar type of law that we're hoping, that will cut down on the result that we don't want, which is that processing of illegal transactions. So next I'll cover kind of the proposed record keeping requirements. There's
Erica,
two
I have a
different
question.
Oh, sure.
So on processing the illegal transactions, how does the booking service provider know if they are processing an illegal transaction? We've talked before about, making the license number visible on the listing, or how does the booking service provider know if that host is legal? And then how does a potential guest know if the transaction that they are seeking to do is legal?
So, want me to jump in here, Erica? Can you mind? So there, one way, we are definitely able to provide information to the booking platforms around our license data, which could assist them with this. Right now, we already have all of our short-term rental license data on our website under the Denver Open Data Catalog. And so it needs a little bit of filtering. And so we definitely will be working with our technology department to see if we can narrow that down and just make a link specifically for short-term rental licenses, which should be pretty straightforward and simple. But then platforms would be able to go to that information, which gets updated daily, and be able to pull information about license locations and license numbers, which would be provide them an opportunity to kind of cross-check it. And I think, Erica, I don't know if any of the next slides go through this, or I know you'll probably mention it in your talking points, but, how a booking platform, we have those tools that will be available for booking platforms to access the data, but then how they go about verifying that will be, up to them to figure out that internal process for how they do that verification.
And then is it going to also be required, though, that the license number be on the STR listing? I know that's something we talked a lot about previously.
That's already a requirement. That's already required. That's been required since the very beginning, that the license number be in the advertisement.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So this sounds different to me than our original, than the mandatory field. Obviously there's, as you just said, Molly, there's the requirement that every host put their license number on their listing. But I know that mandatory field exists within at least Airbnb's ecosystem in some geographical areas, and it doesn't sound like this is requiring that. It seems like we're kind of trying to reinvent the wheel here, instead of using a built-in thing that a built-in piece of software that's already been developed.
So that is.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, this doesn't preclude them from doing mandatory. It's just one thing that we heard from Airbnb at this committee was that there was a need for platform parity, right? And so a ordinance that was that could apply to all platforms equally, right? And so in order to not place a burden on certain platforms or other platforms by dictating the means by which they had to comply, we just gave them a standard to meet. Now, if Airbnb wants to use tools that they've used in other cities, they are certainly welcome to do that. If other platforms want to use tools that they've used, that's great. It's kind of like the bar, right? If the bar would prefer to use an ID scanner, they can do that. If they want to prefer to use the booklet, great. If they want to train all their employees on how different licenses look in a training session, they can do that. It's just giving them the flexibility to figure out what's the best way for us to be able to meet this law. So it's not saying they can't do that. It's just giving other platforms the opportunity to personalize it and do what's best for their business, if that
makes sense to me. Yeah. Then I guess the next question is, obviously there's the $1,000 per violation per day question, but will there be any sort of warning system, like, hey, you have this not in compliance, are you going to fix it today? Or will you guys, or not you guys, but will the city of Denver instead just be starting directly off with the penalties? Will there be some sort of like notice and takedown so that if something's going wrong, a platform can fix that problem before they start racking up pretty serious penalties?
I think one thing that we've said multiple times, and we will definitely reiterate, is that if there is, we do have the open data catalog, and if there are things that we can do that help platforms comply by working on how we share our data, like Molly said, we're looking into further refining that open catalog data to make it easier for platforms to use. We are certainly willing to do that information sharing. So in that sense, yeah, we are, we're flexible in the fact that, we understand that there's some technology concerns and timing concerns. And so wherever we can, we do want to be thoughtful about that.
Got it. Okay, and then the next question that, I'm just worried that the existing tools won't interface right, which is not something I can speak to because I'm not a software engineer at Airbnb. I just, the city of Denver is looking for a certain thing to happen. And my biggest worry, and Airbnb may or may not be able to speak to this, about whether this is compatible with their system, effectively posing the question, assuming that this goes forward and goes in front of the biz committee and then goes to the city council and is passed, will Airbnb continue to operate in the city of Denver, or will we lose out on, $10 million, or I guess they're only 90% of the revenue, so $9 million worth of bookings in 2020 or 2021, sorry. So that's not a question for the city to answer. That's actually a question for whoever's representing Airbnb today. If they can tell us whether they will continue operating in the city if this passes.
I don't.
On the Airbnb side, I think he's going to jump in.
I'm sorry, who's there?
Matt's also on, so I'm going to have him jump in to cover David's question.
So I'm not sure if Matt's available, but while he's maybe connecting, I can let you know that we did speak with Expedia today too. When we talked through, they kind of talked through with us how they think this would work for them, and they seem to think that they could get up to speed with something like this pretty quickly, and that they didn't have any major issues with this language. I don't know if Aisha, you want to chime in, or if Matt's there now?
Molly, sorry about that. I was struggling to get off mute, as we all do from time to time. Erica, I don't want to interrupt the flow of your presentation. I'm happy to, I was going to give some comments in terms of sort of our approach to this, and so I'm happy to wait till the end if you want to sort of finish what you're talking about and circle back on this, or.
I think since a committee member asked, I would go ask you to answer. Sure.
It goes to the, I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for the time, as always. We're committed to Denver, and we're committed to working with the STRAC to, put in place fair regulations. It's why the last time I was on at one of these meetings, we, said we look forward to and continue to look forward to working with the city to adopt legislation. To the point that Erica just raised about platform parity, I would note, and we've raised these comments with excise and license in numerous discussions we've had about this. I would not consider this platform parity in the sense that we do not operate a system of compliance consistent with this law anywhere in the country. It's not. We have compliance systems in place with numerous jurisdictions throughout the country, and this is a system exclusive that we don't do. And so all we've asked for the city to do is to consider providing an additional option, which we call notice and takedown, which I'm happy to describe and can wait till the end of your comments, Erica. But to your question as to whether or not, we would stay in the market, there's strict liability in this law, obviously creates risk. It makes us dependent upon the city keeping an updated list of registrations on a 24/7, 365-day basis, which is, concerns us. And again, we've built out robust compliance tools with numerous cities throughout the United States. All of them are dependent upon a different system of compliance called notice and takedown. If you go back to Erica's list of cities that have imposed platform liability, not one of those cities exclusively use the compliance system that is being proposed in this legislation. They all at least have an alternative compliance system, which is consistent with what we do in different jurisdictions. Again, we've been doing this for 4 to 5 years with numerous jurisdictions like San Francisco. We have really robust tools. We have great cooperative relationships with a number of cities: San Francisco, Los Angeles, Portland, Seattle, New Orleans, etc., Santa Monica, Seattle. And we'd love to be able to do that here. All we've asked for the city is to consider adding an additional option for compliance. There would be a notice and takedown system, which I think has tons of advantages for the city, because it would make them privy to much more data than they would get under a system as they're proposing.
So what I'm hearing, effectively, and correct me if I'm misstating what you just said, is that effectively this could be much less of a headache for Airbnb and probably much less of a headache for the city of Denver if, in addition to having what has been described as a platform parity-based system where every system can do this, there is an additional option that also added that works for Airbnb, that works better within Airbnb's existing ecosystem, while simultaneously allowing all of the other platforms, whether it's direct booking, where somebody's not going to build out a big system like this, to exist if the ordinance were expanded, not in a way that changes what it materially intends to do, but in terms of how it actually is implemented per technology and law, that would be a better solution for Airbnb, to ensure that I, as a host, don't have my income drop to zero, because I personally don't use other platforms. I'm an Airbnb only property.
So to answer your question, David, I think that's actually not an accurate understanding, because for a couple of reasons. I think that by creating like I said, what we have is what we ask for other businesses, small businesses in Denver. Here's the standard. Everyone can figure out how to make it work for them in the way that works best for them. We have had other platforms say that this is not a problem, and it's just Airbnb that has said, they want to comply with this in a different way. I would also like to point out, since Matt brought it up on this slide, with all of the cities, they do have different requirements for platforms. But as you will see, that many of them have been sued by platforms for those specific types of requirements. So our legal team has done a phenomenal job of researching at the request of this committee how to enact some sort of regulation that applies equally to all platforms, that does not open us up to that liability that we've seen in other cities, because the compliance systems that are prevalent in other cities exist in large part as a result of settlements from lawsuits. So that was something this committee asked us to avoid, and that was our goal. So I hope that clears a little bit.
Erica, I would refute that. There are dozens of cities in California who are now pursuing platform liability, none of which is under litigation, all of which are proposing systems like we discussed. Second of all, what I think is important is the cities that invented the language that Denver is proposing, San Francisco and Santa Monica, went with straight booking transaction strict liability as being proposed by Denver. And ultimately, they even veered away from this and use a notice and takedown system as we propose, and do not use the system as is being proposed by Denver. So even the cities that created this language don't use it and provide only the singular compliance option that Denver is proposing. All we are asking is to have more than one compliance option. And David, to your point, I would just like to speak to it as well, is that I think that sure, it's consistent with what we do, but I think it's also very, very beneficial to cities in many ways. Los Angeles is a very good example. They just passed a law, primary residence only. They have both compliance systems. They have the system that is proposed by Denver, and they also have the notice and takedown system that is used by Airbnb. VRBO does it one way in Los Angeles, Airbnb does it the other in Los Angeles. And I would say the way that we do it in Los Angeles is very advantageous to the city, because if you do it this way, where you're just checking against a list, there is no need for sharing of any data between the platform and the city. Whereas we share through our notice and takedown system, we agree to share a meaningful amount of data with the city. And in Los Angeles, they have a 120 night cap on how many nights you can rent. We actually, in our agreement with the city to do notice and takedown, the compliance system we do, agree to share the number of nights that hosts have listed. VRBO uses the other system where they just check if a host is registered or not, sharing none of that data. As a result of none of that data being shared, the city has zero insight into whether or not a host has exceeded that 120 night cap on VRBO. The only way they can do it is, by scraping the data, third-party vendors, seeing if they have exceeded it on the data. They mostly use the data that we provide them to then take listings down off VRBO because they know they've exceeded 120 night cap because of the data we've given. So it's a significant, that's just one example of where our system results in the city receiving increased amounts of data to the benefit of their enforcement scheme in a way that would not be available here.
So Erica, can I chime in real quick? I just want to provide one clarification, then I think I have a question for Matt as well. So my clarification is that, again, we think the solution, the process that Airbnb has proposed to us or has discussed with us is a way to comply with the language as it's written. So we don't disagree that what they're proposing as a solution is a good solution. However, we don't want to put an ordinance how the platforms are going to do it. For us, platform parity doesn't mean if Airbnb can do it for us the same way they do it for other cities. Platform parity for us means that we're treating all platforms that operate in Denver the same. And so that's one clarification. And then my question for Matt is, you said something about Airbnb providing data with the city versus the city providing data to Airbnb. And so I think what you're proposing, or what you don't find to be an optimal solution is, or your preference would be that the city identify the listings that are unlicensed as opposed to us providing the data to Airbnb and Airbnb identifying the unlicensed listings. Is that a correct explanation?
I think that's fair, yes. But again, you know, it put the two things. One, it makes us completely reliant on your keeping up to date data at all times. Otherwise, it puts us in strict liability for $1,000 a night. Second, I think it's disadvantageous for the city because the city receives no information about the listings on its site. I'm happy to give other examples as to the advantages that are provided by the city, but I would dispute, Molly, that the system that you're putting in place does not allow for the notice and takedown system. We know that we've talked across each other. There's no way that the city portal that we would propose is incompatible with what you've proposed. The system that, you know, every other city in California and Hawaii and Seattle and Portland that have put in place the option of notice and takedown, all of that is incompatible with the strict liability booking transaction language with no other safe harbor that you've proposed. And so,
nope, it works. It does not. Provide a solution of noticing and takedown works with the language we've provided.
It does not, Molly. It does not.
Our license data is updated every 24 hours. And so that data is available for us to identify or for Airbnb to identify listings that are unlicensed. And we can notify you and go through that process, or Airbnb. It works, actually, it provides more flexibility because it gives both the city and Airbnb the opportunity to identify unlicensed listings.
Molly, I respectfully disagree, and that's why most cities, all cities have adopted the notice and takedown provision, and no city that we're aware of only has this strict liability provision as you're proposing. They all do notice and takedown, or at least provide the option. It's clearly best practices. It's clearly where the most robust compliance systems have been built around. It's why we've developed the city portal in order to facilitate this types of compliance with cities. I think there's just a basic misunderstanding of how these systems work, and we would love to have the opportunity to continue to work with the city and the XL to clarify the misunderstandings of how these systems work, so we can, you know, get to a place where we can be really good partners with the city. That's the intent of the city portal. But the city portal's pointless if you proceed down this path. And so we think that the city is shortchanging its own compliance efforts by proceeding down this path. We do not think there's any parity here, and we don't think it follows best practices of other compliance systems in dozens and dozens of cities around the country. And so we would just respectfully disagree and ask for more time to work with the city. We've given you a short, very short, one-sentence amendment to the law that we think would begin to address our concerns. We'd love for you to further consider that. We're happy to share that with STRAC. We're happy to share that with the City Council. And again, we would just ask to continue to work together so we can get to our mutual goal of putting in place an efficient, productive, enforceable regulation system in Denver.
So I'm gonna also just kind of mention one more thing to push back a little bit, and just remind everybody that we did talk with Expedia today, and they proposed the same exact process for a solution to comply with this law and that Airbnb is providing, and they were amenable to this language and agreed that the mandatory field and the notice and takedown was a good way to be able to comply with this language. And again, I'll just also state, it came up at the beginning of the meeting, but Denver faced a $226 million deficit in our budget in 2020 and $190 million in 2021. I believe what Airbnb is asking here is for the compliance to be on the city as opposed to Airbnb doing the due diligence to identify the unlicensed listings. And we just don't have the capacity to do those and resources to do that work for the platform.
And I want to make sure that we're respectful of everybody's time because we are nearing the point where we'll have to check for public comment. So Matt, thank you so much for providing that feedback. I would like to see if any of the other STRAC members have feedback, like Cindy.
Yes, Erica, I have a question for Matt before he leaves. Matt, are you telling us that Airbnb does not have the capacity when they put a new listing up to check with Denver first to make sure that that listing has been licensed and that you wait until the listing is licensed?
Thanks for unmuting me, Erica. Can you repeat that question? I apologize.
Sure. Are you telling us that Airbnb does not have the capacity to post a new listing after you check first on Denver's website to make sure that new license is listed, and to confirm that the number that the host is giving you to post the license is a proper number?
What we have done is we do not have that system in place. What the system that we have worked with cities in other jurisdictions is that we provide them data of all the listings on our site. They check the listings for valid registrations and tell us to take down the listings that are in violation, and we take them down within an agreed upon period of time. I would just like to go back to Molly's point about Expedia agreeing to this. Expedia, it just should be clear that Expedia and Airbnb have very different views of data sharing. Expedia is very protective of its data and does not tends to avoid sharing as little data as possible with jurisdictions. And so they prefer this approach where they don't have to share any data with the city. We think that's disadvantageous to the city because the city gets no data whatsoever, as I was talking about in Los Angeles. That's why they opted for the option where they did not have to share data. In other jurisdictions where the jurisdictions do not offer this type of system, notice and takedown, Expedia builds that system out. But again, no city has just done only this system.
But Matt, what I proposed has nothing to do with what you just said. You're not sharing any data. Your personnel are going to the Denver website to make sure you as a provider are in compliance with licensing rules in Denver. You don't even have to share information. All you have to do is check and see if it's not listed and licensed, you cannot put it up on your website. I think that's very plain and simple. It takes your step to do it, and that's what every other platform that does this kind of thing does in other municipalities. They never post it.
I think that a point needs to be made here that I need to reiterate, that I personally, this is my personal view, I don't think that the city should be talking to platforms that aren't Airbnb in making rules, because they don't matter. If somebody from VRBO is hearing this, you can, do whatever you want to me. But the only platform that matters in the city of Denver is Airbnb. They represent 90% of our business. VRBO represents 1/10 of that. And the other, God knows, 10, 100, 500 platforms that are out there that exist represent 1/10 of what VRBO has in terms of market share in this city. So I don't think it makes sense for us to move forward with a rule that could damage 90% of our short-term rental industry from a revenue standpoint. Most of my clients who come to me when I have a conversation with them, which isn't every time, I don't talk to every single guest in depth, but plenty of them only use the Airbnb platform. They don't look at other platforms. This is not a competitive marketplace. There are people who don't use Airbnb. There are people who only use VRBO, but there's a huge segment of the population that doesn't use other platforms. And so for me, I think it's really, really bad for me as an individual in this space to be put in a position where I might have to change platforms.
Hi, this is
or-
Buffy. I have something to say also. You were just talking about the time limit here, and I wonder, just so we can understand this better, if we could be sent some information about each of these approaches and why the city favors the one and why Airbnb favors the other, so that we could look at it in more detail and just, instead of just hearing yes, but, since we're running out of time to hear anything.
Sure, we can definitely send up a summary of some of the discussion that we've had today. We'll send some of the materials that, you know, we've heard from Airbnb with the committee. And if you all want to, you know, share additional thoughts with each other, I would welcome you to do that too. We have 15 minutes left. I don't see anybody's hand raised for public comment, but I would like to know if there's anyone else on the committee. Thank you so much, David, for your thoughts, and Matt for your thoughts. But we have not heard from very many other people. So if there's anyone else who, you know, has been wanting to speak and hasn't gotten a chance, I would like to invite them to do that right now.
I didn't raise my hand because I want to be conscious of time here, but it just seems like this is something maybe we need to schedule an additional meeting. You know, I know every other month was our cadence when there wasn't a lot at stake, and we changed it to every month to, maybe it was last year, to implement some changes, but it seems like there's a lot that kind of we're all digesting right now. And I think it's great that we're having this conversation with Airbnb, and it's been in the works for a while, but I think for this to move forward without having us all feel like we have a good understanding of how this could actually impact everyone would seem like a little rushed, which I know is probably funny to say because we've been working on this for a while, but that would just be my 2 cents.
Thanks, Dana. Okay, so I see that we have 3 people signed up for public comment, and I want to make sure we leave them time. So I'm just going to go through the rest of these slides quickly, and then we'll circle to the public comment, and then we can talk about next steps. So the other things that are in the ordinance, like I said, it's ordinance, but there are some records and Cs, the hosts, as well as the booking service providers. These are things that, from what we've heard and read and researched, that hosts and booking service providers are already keeping track of for tax purposes or record keeping purposes. So this will just help us in the enforcement of the ordinance. He would be subject to the regular administrative fine schedule, not the $1,000 per day. The other proposed changes are in Chapter 32. Like I said, these are things that we do for all licenses, and that, you know, our existing practices, longstanding, and in the spirit of increasing transparency while we're updating an ordinance, we wanted to add them. So these include the standard procedures for hearing officers who provide the departmental decisions. If anyone's ever been to a denial hearing or a licensing hearing, they've interacted with the hearing officers, and then the standard procedures for issuing subpoenas for those hearings. Again, those don't change anything. That is how the department has been doing things. It's just in the spirit of putting it in ordinance. So to summarize, the short ordinance would require that all platforms who process those transactions, so you know, like we talked about at the beginning, for stays in Denver would be regulated. It lays out the responsibility of the platform that says, you know, do not process an illegal transaction, but it does not prescribe, here's how you have to do it. We know that there are many different ways that platforms can meet that requirement. We've heard from platforms that that's a requirement that is meetable. And so we, you know, rather than dictate the way that platforms need to do it, we are leaving it to the choice of the platform. To assist with the investigations, that's where the record keeping provisions would come in. And all of this will allow us to keep pace with the evolution of the industry, continuously improving by ensuring that the regulatory responsibility for a compliant short-term rental industry in Denver is not only shouldered by hosts, it's shared by the platforms who make a lion's share of the profit here in Denver, and across the globe from the hosts that are doing the work. So with that, I'll go to the timeline. So we, always our first step is to go to the policy review committee. We did that at the end of September. We do have a tentative biz committee date for November 4th, but with Dana's suggestion, I would, open it up to the rest of the committee. If you want to email us what your thoughts are on that, we would definitely welcome your thoughts about how quickly you want to move, if you want more time to digest the information, if you want to schedule an additional meeting in November, we could look at doing that, which would push that biz committee date afterward. And I will follow up by sending the information that Buffy asked for as well. This is more just to outline the steps that then after committee, it would go to city council if it passed out of committee. So that's kind of the quick, oh, sure, Buffy.
Oh, with that information, David has told us about the tax revenue that the city makes from Airbnb, our rentals. Could you also add to that the amount of money that Airbnb is making from our rentals? Like, which one is getting the most money out of this?
I can actually speak to that. Airbnb makes a little bit less money, I think, than the city makes. Because the tax rate for the city of Denver is 10.75%, and I can look in my own records and see how much a guest paid in, different fees that are tacked on, whether it's the cleaning fee or the city or the state or the Airbnb fees, and they're relatively comparable. I want to say that the tax rate is slightly higher than what Airbnb makes. Their rule is at 6 to 12%, and from what I've seen, it's usually roughly 9% on most of my bookings. So whatever the city makes, you can assume Airbnb makes a little bit less than that.
Okay.
We'll double check that, Buffy, though. We'll see if we can get that information from Airbnb, if they'll tell us that.
Erica, I know you're going to gather information from all of us after this meeting, but I do think there would be immense value just given the churn and lack of clarity that I think people are grappling with this for the first time, gathering the information, digesting it, and ensuring that we make the right decision. So I think you've heard it in different ways from different people, but my recommendation would be that we either have a special meeting or that we maybe have the business committee slip by whatever time period that is to December to give us adequate time to vet all this and be aligned in a singular approach as best we can. I think because most of us got the information in preparation for this meeting. So that, just one more data point there.
Can I propose an alternative solution or an alternative timeline? I mean, the ordinance itself is pretty short. It's 3 pages, I think. I don't know if we can meet somewhere in a quicker cadence than a month from now in order to keep the timeline on track, but that's a possibility as well. I don't know if we need to wait a whole month in between when we discuss this again.
Yeah, I think, Molly, whatever you can put together, that would give us time to just give you feedback. Everyone's receptive to that.
Okay, with that, I want to make sure we get to our 3 public comments. So the order I have is Danielle Anderson, Eric S., and Chuck. So Danielle, I will allow you to talk using the Zoom feature. So hopefully that will, so let's see. I think you should be able to speak now.
Hi, can you hear me? Erica?
Danielle? Yes.
Hi, I just am curious, we talked a lot about the new platform compliance, but we didn't really go over on how that would be enforced. So one of the comments was if the city was going to look at all Airbnb listings and compliance or put that back onto Airbnb or the platform, but how would the platform then be enforced? Wouldn't the city then have to go back and look through all the data that Airbnb did? And then I also have a question on what the difference is between the notice and takedown and the additional like one line that Airbnb wanted to add to the ordinance to change it. Matt had said something about just an addendum to the ordinance language.
Okay, thank you for your question. I don't know, Molly, if you want to address either of those questions or if you want to do it at the end.
You're on mute, Molly.
Thanks, sorry. Yeah, we can come back to them if we have a couple of minutes at the end, but let's get through the other public comments first.
Okay. Then I will go to the next public speaker, which is Eric S.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Hey, I don't know if this is the right forum for this. So if it is going to confuse things more, please let me know and I can reach out to somebody in a different space. It's specific to my situation, and more specifically, I'm wondering if you're able to have 2 listings for the same address. I built an additional dwelling unit on my property, basically a mother-in-law suite that has a 1-bedroom and a studio. Now I can Airbnb that in a singular way, or I can Airbnb it in 2 separate units. And if I wanted to Airbnb it as 2 separate units, would I be allowed to have 2 separate listings for that same address?
Eric, you've hit on kind of 3 different questions there without kind of realizing it. So you can see Erica's email address.
Brian.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but since this is public comment and this is specific to one, let's try not to answer the questions and just get back to him if we can. Sorry.
I'm just going to say email that address that's on there, Erica Rogers, and she'll forward the question to me, and I'll speak to you later about that.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Eric. All right, and our last public speaker is Chuck. Let's see. I believe that you should be.
Hello.
Hello, Chuck.
I think I got my answer from the last questioner. I have a specific question. I was just wondering who the best person on the team would be to talk to about my issue.
Probably me, Brian Snow. If you want to write down my email, it's brian.snow, S-N-O-W, @denvergov.org.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thanks, Chuck. And just as a PSA, if you have any questions that are specific, any other attendees maybe have some burning questions, you can always at any time email licenses@denvergov.org. It's actually the preferred way if you have a question, because then it goes through our 311 tracking system, and we can make sure that it gets assigned to the right team member. So just FYI, that's a always available option. So seeing no other public comments, do we want to circle back to Molly? Do you want to circle back to the questions that
Yeah, if you can just restate them real quickly, or unless you want to answer them, but I didn't write them down. So if you want to tell me what they were.
She asked about how would the ordinance be enforced
Yep.
against platforms.
And then what was the second question?
That was her first question, if we want to talk about that. And then the difference between, what's the difference between the method that the ordinance proposes and notice and takedown? Those are the 2 questions.
So I'll answer the second question first, which is the difference between the method and notice and takedown. And the The difference is that our ordinance doesn't specify a method. Notice and takedown and implementing a mandatory field would probably be sufficient in order to comply with the language in our ordinance. And so we're just remaining agnostic as to what the solution is or what the process is to comply. Just like Erica stated, we don't tell businesses how to comply with liquor laws or building code, and so it's just up to the businesses that operate in Denver to figure out how to be in compliance with the law, rather than us stipulating the mechanism. And how enforcement would work is, you know, not only would it's illegal, it would be unlawful to process an unlicensed transaction. So the transaction would actually have to be processed, and we'd have to do an investigation. And we'd have to gather that information and then go through the same due process that we have when there are other violations of other ordinances. And I think, and the language is in there that the fine can be up to $1,000 a day per violation. So for each transaction that's processed, for each day that a transaction is processed, the booking service platform would be subject to $1,000. So that hopefully answer it.
Erica, can I address something?
Sure.
I will return to the fact, and maybe this is why a subsequent conversation and more discussion is necessary. The system that we use for compliance in numerous other jurisdictions, such as San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, Portland, and on, is not compatible with the language as proposed by the city of Denver. They are not compatible. And so it's probably a lengthier conversation, but they are not compatible. As many times as the city says it, it's not true. They're not compatible. So
hey, Michael, let me interrupt you here for a minute. This is Denver. It's not Seattle. It's not Portland. It's Denver. We've been going through this for a long time, and I've been asking you people to delist for several years now. Just remember, this is Denver. Okay?
Point taken. Understand that. We just
got you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. It is now 5:31, so as always, I am trying to be very respectful of everyone's time. I appreciate the dialogue on this. I will send out some follow-up information probably tomorrow to the STR committee members to answer or to address some of the issues that were raised, such as timing of the ordinance, potentially scheduling another session, and as Buffy asked, sending out additional information about you know, the framework for how this would look. So if you have any additional questions you think of later tonight or tomorrow that you would like us to send around, please just send those to me, and I will do my best to get you everything that you have asked for. So
this is Buffy. I'm thinking of something like in the voter information packets where they have you know, the for and against, the arguments kind of thing, just kind of basically what are we looking at? Why is this not working?
Sure. I will do my best to provide you as much information that I can so that you can make an educated feedback about the ordinance. So thank you again, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I am going to end the webinar now. Very nice to see everybody.
Erica, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erica.